Hi, friends, and welcome to my Boomer Buddies podcast, where we tell it like it was and is. I'm Rick Reed. I'm your host. Welcome, everybody, to special guest Arthur Dean. Art, how are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Tell a little bit about your background. You're a musician and a veteran, and a lot of things have happened in your life that are interesting. We're going to touch on them.
Yeah, I'm just another boomer. Robbinsdale class of '65. University of Minnesota. College career interrupted by a brief stint in Vietnam. Played music before I went to Vietnam. Well, back in '63 and '64 and '65, I didn't know too many people that weren't playing in a band. Everybody had a band of some kind, even if it was just a basement band. And kind of got the start by watching a group when I was, I think, a junior in high school or a sophomore. A group called the Underbeats played at a sock hop. And the first thing I noticed was all us guys trying to get the attentions of the girls to dances. They didn't want to dance, so watching the guys in the band. So I figured, hell, there's only 5 other guys in the band versus competing with 1,500 other guys, trying to get a dance on the dance floor. So we decided to play music. Plus, we liked music. Music was, I think, from the time that I can remember from elementary school to this present day, music has always been part of our lives as boomers. Period. And the Vietnam War and all that also um, uh, it influenced music. It really, really changed it during the '60s. And as all us boomers grew up through assassinations and riots and summer of peace and all that, we all had the same experiences. I think that when I think back, I'm being really egotistic and thinking, wow, look at all the things that we lived through, which was incredible. But when I think about my grandmother, who moved down here from Onamia, Minnesota, back in the 1800s in a horse-drawn wagon, at that time, the only way you could get off the planet Earth was climb up a tree, a ladder, or maybe get in a balloon. And in her lifetime, they went from balloons to the moon. So maybe we haven't gone through as much as we thought, but I just think there was, they had wars too. So maybe it's just the ongoing generational changes of life.
And Art, let's point out to the watchers, the viewers, and the listeners out there, we're based out of Minnesota. And the music scene in Minnesota in the early 60s to mid 60s was pretty hopping, wasn't it? Maybe you want to touch on that.
Yeah, there were a lot of bands, local bands. Especially my school, Robbinsdale High School, had I think something at one point I counted like 7 or 8 Minnesota Rock and Roll Hall Minnesota musician members. So there was a lot, and that prompted us. One of my best friends wound up being in a band called the Del Counts, which was a very big local band. And I remember I ran into him in the hall. It was our junior year between classes, and he said, "You doing anything Friday night?" And I said, "No." He said, "We got to come in playing with a new band down at the Miracle Ballroom called the Del Counts." And it was about the time their record "Let the Good Times Roll" came out. And if you're a boomer, you'll know that song. People from that era probably won't, but it was a good big local hit. So we went down to Miracle Ballroom that night, and it was a sold out crowd. Marsh Productions, Marshall Stein, thank you, Marshall. That was just local. And then out of Robbinsdale, there were musicians that were in Still Roving, who recorded Hey Joe locally here. There were musician Rod Eaton, drummer in the Underbeats. I mean, there were just, you go on and on. Denny Libby, who had a number of different groups he was in, and they're all in the Minnesota rock and roll band. And of course, the Trashmen, who really kind of started out locally here, at least in Minneapolis and in the suburbs, were Robbinsdale guys. So that kind of got everybody going locally, and it just kind of spread. I didn't play my first band until '67, '68. We entered the Minnesota State Fair Amateur Band Contest and wound up taking third, and wound up getting probably one of the biggest crowds I ever played. We wound up down playing at the Minneapolis Auditorium with the other 2 bands, the Del Counts, a big regional band called the Flippers that had a great hit out that was big locally called the Harlem Shuffle, and then Paul Revere and the Raiders. And
Oh,
that was
nice.
quite an experience. Yeah, that was quite an experience. In fact, I remember we were third to go on because we were third place, and first place band opened up, second place band. And I remember standing backstage and looking out the crowd. I've never seen that many people in my life. Even though Robbinsdale High School had 5,000 kids in our junior year, I couldn't know how many people, and I was very, very nervous. And I remember standing backstage and just I couldn't believe it. So we got out there, we started playing. I remember I'm playing bass in this group. We had a horn player, and we're doing a song by the Buckinghams called "Don't You Care."
Hmm.
And my right leg was shaking so hard I could not stop it. Somehow or other we got to the song. I don't remember it, but apparently it was well received, and everybody started clapping more and more and more, and my leg quit shaking.
Now you are a guitarist and you do
At that
vocal.
time, I was a bassist. I played bass.
Oh,
I started in bass, and I taught myself to play guitar in Vietnam when I had time. That's where I started. And when I came
okay.
home, because I wasn't very well versed in guitar yet, the groups that I played bass at that time because I wasn't good enough in guitar yet.
So you went to Vietnam. Were you drafted?
That's a story in itself. Winter quarter 68, I got mono and had to drop out. I couldn't complete. And in those days, there was a requirement that you had to have X number of credits per year to keep your deferment. It was
Hmm.
45, so 15 a quarter. Well, I only had 30 that year because I got sick. So my mother called the University of Minnesota and talked to somebody at a military agent's office or something. I'm not sure what it was. And they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You can get the medical deferment." So I said, "Okay, cool." So that was good because that summer, the band I was playing in, it's called the Sensations. We got a summer gig up in Waukon, Minnesota, Lake Mille Lacs for the whole summer. So I was more interested in doing that than going to school. So I was glad it happened. So I rolled back in fall quarter 68. Came home and there was a letter from the Secret Service. I didn't even look at it. I thought it was my deferment. So I just threw it up in the dresser and let it lay there about a month. And sometime end of September, early October, I opened it and I said, "Oh, they want to draft me." So I took this to my mom. My mom went and called the draft board and said, "We want to apply for this medical deferment." And their quote was, "What medical deferment?" There
Hmm.
was none.
Hmm.
So there was no choice. In those days, there's a lot of my compatriots and baby boomers who went through it. There wasn't many choices. Prison? No, no, thank you. Leaving your country and never coming home? Never coming home? No, of course, I think it was it Bush or Clinton that changed that and let them come home. But at that time, he was never coming home. So there really wasn't much alternative. So I went and went in December 8th, 68, and came home in October of 70.
Okay. So where did you go to boot camp?
Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
What was boot camp
Well,
like? I've
not
never served, so I can't
well.
relate.
I think I was very lucky
Yeah.
because I don't. A lot of people have horror stories about boot camp, and again, it's just the luck of the draw. The particular sergeants you get, the particular units you get in, it's just the luck of the draw. And I just happened to get in first platoon, B company, and for whatever reason, and again, they threw you in by alphabetical order, okay, and we just were number one in everything, no matter what, physical tests with everything. So consequently, we got very little harassment. I don't really, other than being away from home, crummy food, uh, and just the whole dread of what's might be in front of you. I don't have any bad memories of boot camp, but I do know there were guys there. I mean, we'd come out in the morning. We were first platoon. Second platoon was just a bunch of mess ups. And every morning they'd be in front leaning position or laying on their back, holding their foot lockers up at their feet, and sergeants running up and down, yelling in their ears and their face. And we'd be standing over there just relaxing, waiting for roll call because they weren't harassing us because we were doing what we were supposed to do. And not that we wanted to, but it made everything else easier.
And what was your primary job after training?
When you got done with basic training, they assigned you what was called an MOS. I don't know what MOS was stood for, but it was something to do with your job description, what you were going to be doing. Because basic training was just getting you in shape, getting all your shots, filling out all your records, learning how to shoot, learning how to throw a grenade, learn how to march, all that kind of stuff. AIT, which they called Advanced Interventional Training, basic training was 12 weeks. Advanced training was also 12 weeks. And that's where you learned the specific job that you were going to do in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And you would, after you found out that you had graduated from, well, not graduated, at least advanced or whatever they call it, from base camp, then you stood in formation and they would say your name, your MOS, and your destination. And the one thing you didn't want to hear was B1 Infantry, Fort Polk, Louisiana. You didn't want to hear that at all because, I mean, it was pretty evident most of us are going to Vietnam anyway. But I mean, if you're all of a sudden training as an infantryman in the swamps, I think I know where I'm going. Well, they said 13 Alpha 10. I didn't know what the hell it was, but it wasn't V1. It could have been cleaning out latrines for all I cared. And it was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So and it turned out to be artillery.
Okay.
So, and Fort Sill was a very bad place. Just depressing because it was a fort town. And when you went through Fort Sill, it would be a pawn shop, a pool hall, bar hall, a strip joint, a pawn shop, a pool hall, a strip joint. And it was just Fort Town, very, very depressing.
So you ship off to Vietnam. What was your first impression
I
when you
think
got to Vietnam?
there's a movie. I saw a lot of movies about Vietnam, and there were some that were particularly good. There were parts of Apocalypse Now that were incredibly realistic. And then I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Platoon or one of those movies, there was an opening scene that was exactly what I went through and what we all went through. I mean, we flew out of Fort Lewis on May 17th, 1969. Yeah, on Northwest Airlines flight, which was really weird because you're on an civilian airplane with stewardesses and everything, and you're flying into a war zone. And I remember as we got over coming over the China Sea, South China Sea, I think it was, and heading into Vietnam, the pilot came on board and said, "Gentlemen, look out your left window, or aft window, or whatever it was." And he said, "You can see the Republic of Vietnam." And I looked out and it looked like the moon, and there were craters everywhere.
Wow.
So we landed. It was in the afternoon, and it was hot. It was dry season. It was, I don't know, 100 and some degrees, I think. And we lined up they had this metal stuff that they linked together with holes in it where the sand was coming up through, because we're kind of Cameron Bay on the beach on the ocean. And it was kind of a platform for everybody to stand on. Of course, that radiated heat has been sitting in the sun all day, and you're just sweating and in formation outside the plane, and you're standing in your brand new green uniforms, and you look across, and there's the formation of the guys getting on the plane. And just like you said, there were very few, there were some, but very few who were cheering and going home. Most in very faded uniforms compared to our brand new green uniforms. We're very distant looking, and very few were saying anything. And I think that was at that moment when it hit me that this was it. There's no choice, and maybe if you're lucky enough to go home, that hopefully will be you. It will be one of the ones cheering going home, and not one of the ones that look like they're already dead. So one time we went into War Zone C, which is a very bad area, and one of the worst areas, except for maybe up by where the Marines up in I-Corps. But we went into War Zone C, which was kind of the area, the infiltration area through the Parrots Peak into Vietnam. And we went in there with the 11th Armored Cav, and every night, and we were doing the base operation. It was just a very, very temporary base, and we were doing base protection. And every night, the guys would roll out in these tanks, and they go out and they get shot up and beat up. And every night, about dusk, it'd be dead quiet, and you'd hear just the mechanics of the half tracks and the tanks coming back in, and you'd watch these guys coming in, and just, I don't know how they did it every day. And that's, I suppose, those are the guys that are filling our hospitals today.
Yeah.
You lived on adrenaline. I got an early out from Vietnam, but I had to extend in Vietnam, and you only had to spend 12 months there. I went up spending almost 16 to get out early. And you think when you're coming home it's all over, but it's not all over. You left. When I left home in '68, we had no internet connection, and the image of home in '68 was the image I carried with me, or '69, I should say. When I came home in '70, that image was being carried, and that image was no longer around.
Yeah.
And you were living on adrenaline. All of a sudden, life got boring, and the life that you knew was no longer on. All your friends had changed, and you didn't think you had changed, but you had. So consequently, you weren't connected with anybody anymore. You weren't, and I think a lot of guys went to drugs and alcohol and because of that. So you're living on adrenaline for 15, 16 months, and you come home and there's no adrenaline, and life feels boring to you. And the second card was stacked against you was that the whole world that you had known when you left was no longer there. It was gone. So you felt like a stranger, saying you didn't know anybody anymore. Plus, I'd gone over as a kid, and I came home as an adult, a blank adult. And what I mean by that is I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what I was, didn't know what I stood for, didn't know what's life, nothing. I was just totally, totally lost. And there are three things that kind of saved me from a bad outcome. Parents first, tough love. They kicked me out after 6 months. My stepfather said, "It's the hottest thing I've ever done, but if I don't kick you out, you're not going to do anything," because I wasn't doing anything. I was just lost, just a mess. And the second thing was music, because I got back into music. And that gave me a chance to find an identity again, to be a person, even if it was just through music, somewhere to start. And then the third was the love of my life, who kind of reopened my heart that there was a reason to live and something to live for. So those are things that, but not every guy that came back. And when I complain, like I've got a skin condition, I have a few Vietnam-related issues, bit by a scorpion, I got typhus, and I go out to every 2 weeks I go out for treatment to the VA, and I was feeling sorry for myself, except every night when I leave, by the exit, there's a half moon of wheelchairs. A guy my age is sitting in wheelchairs, with lost limbs, or something, because for whatever reason, whatever they went through, they could never get over, and for whatever reason, the Lord gave me the opportunity to get over it and continue with my life. Although it took 14 years, I did go through PTSD counseling until 1984, and I came home in 70. So I kind of look at it like 14, 15 lost years, because I was just
In art, from what I've heard, you're not unique in
no.
veterans coming back and feeling the same way, experiencing just what you did. The country had changed, you had changed,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, a lot of
It's
people that were here and didn't experience it didn't really help you.
the war was so controversial.
Yeah.
And I still have a problem with this today when people come up and they thank me for my service, because my service was not voluntary. Okay, first off. And to me, and I'm not trying to dishonor anybody who lost life or limb over there, to me, just for me personally, it was not an honorable, okay, like World War II or maybe Korea. I don't know about Korea, but World War II for sure. So when we came home, the last thing you wanted your friends to know was you were a Vietnam veteran. So nobody talked about it. And I'm sure with probably the Korean veterans and World War veterans too. The difference was they came home from a positive effort. Okay, save the world, basically. The greatest generation. And we came home at that time, the Berettas and all the streets of San Francisco, who were the idiots that were holding hostages with M16s? They're all Vietnam veterans. Okay, so, I remember the first week I was home, I had short hair, and I went down to Calhoun Beach, Lake Calhoun Beach, and nobody would talk to me because I had short hair. And then I remember everybody complaining about pollution. Then when I got up and left the beach, there was popcorn and pop and cans and beer everywhere, just left like a pigsty. I thought, wow, if you got long hair and you will accept short hairs, what's any different from you and your parents who have short hair and will accept long hairs? What's the difference? And I kind of went into it. That kind of aided my depression at the time, because you came home, hoping for this, peace generation, the love generation, and it turned out not to really be real or sustainable.
I want to go back. You mentioned that you learned to play guitar in Vietnam. How did that come about?
Oh, my two best buddies. No, I had three good buddies over there. One was a Chicano, and Chavez was his name, and that's all I ever knew him by, and I don't know if he's even alive today. But we were in a base camp somewhere, and I can't remember where, maybe Phu Bien. and there was a little NCO club there, and they had a Vietnamese band playing. Okay, and they got done, and he went up and said, "Could he play guitar?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And then Chavez knew I played bass, so we went up and we played a few songs. And we got all done, and then I got done playing bass, and I realized, one of the things I love to do is sing. And if I know the song on bass, the guitar player doesn't know it. But if I know it on guitar, I can do the song I want to do, and the bass player can follow. So I
Yeah.
decided at that point and then he helped me. He got me going. And whenever it was also, and it is still to this day, I'd come in from the field and we'd get in at night, and you'd be tense and be hard to sleep. And I could sit down and play the guitar for a little while, and it would relax me and help me get to sleep. Because it was very, very hard to sleep over there.
So Chavez helped you.
Yeah,
And
yeah. The sad story about Chavez was that he was one of the first of my three buddies to go home. My other buddy was Dennis Hurd from Venice Beach, California, and Ray Watts, who was a African American from Watts, Ray Wiggin from Watts, L.A. He was my best friend. Chavez went home first, and we heard through some of his Chicano buddies in the unit that he had tried to send home a bunch of pot in a porcelain piece and got busted. It was in a prison in Arizona. So I don't know whatever happened to him. He was a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray Wiggins went home second. Ray was about 6'5", big, nicest black guy I've ever known in my life. We just had a great relationship. Started out a little rocky until I kind of learned that his way of acting was just his way of being. Okay, it really helped educate me. But he went home second, and I remember saying, "Well, I have relatives now. I'm going to come out and visit." This was like 1970. And he said, "I'd love you to come." He said, "But," he said, it's sad." He said, "Unfortunately, my brothers wouldn't understand a white man visiting me in Watts." So I don't know what happened to him. He was a great guy. And my third buddy was Dennis Hurd, and Dennis was typical California guy. I mean, he could rip you off and look you in the face, say, "Hey man, I wouldn't rip you off, not me, man." But he would still be your friend, and that was the way the California guys were. It was just the New York guys were tense. Hey man, what's going on? In a hurry. The California guys were laid back. I mean, you could just see the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast, and the guys that came from the different places. It was really amazing. And then there was all of us in the middle of the country, all pretty same.
Do you have a special memory from Vietnam that is uplifting?
No, nothing uplifting. So many sad things.
Weird question, but the reason I asked that is you mentioned your friends and you kind of lit up there.
Oh yeah,
So,
because you got to remember, when you're in a war zone, you're not fighting 24/7, 52.
yeah.
You may go 2, 3 days, 4 days a week without seeing anything. Okay, then you go back in town, and in Vietnam, the army was broken into three groups: the professional corps, okay, your officers, your guys that went to NCO school or officer training.
Mhm.
Then the rest of the group was broken into what I called alkies, the beer drinkers and the hard alcoholics, the druggies, pot, you name it, all the way up to heroin.
Wow.
And then the straights, okay? And you were in one of those three groups. And the people who drank and did drugs were doing it because when you're an American kid, you're at home and you had a bad Wednesday, you could say, "Hey, Friday we're going to go out to dance, man, and be better," right? Over there it was, well, let's see, in 15 months I'm gonna 15 months. Well, there's even no guarantee you're going to be there in 15 months. So in order to cope with what you were going through, people escaped, and they either did drugs. We even had a morphine addict in our unit. We carried these gas masks for gas tax, and we didn't get gas tax very much, but we did. And one of the antidotes was a spring-loaded cartridge that had morphine in it. Well, we had an inspection after coming in off the field, gas mask inspection, because they suspected, and of course there was a lot of morphine missing. So they locked us down. There was a guy in my squad Okie from Oklahoma, Ray Dobbs, gotten a Dear John from his wife of 5 years about a month before. And we were all sitting down just waiting for somebody to break, and it was him. He was sitting at the table by himself, and all of a sudden he lifted the table up, threw it against the wall, started going crazy, ran out. And that was it. I don't know what happened to him, because sometimes when that happened and he put you in the hospital, or you went in the brink for something that you did illegally or wrong, it was called dead time. If you went in and you had 11 months left to serve, and you served 6 months in jail, you got out, you had 11 months left to serve. So I don't know how they treated him, but there was a lot. I don't know uplifting. There's very many sad moments. I think the most uplifting moment was probably when I came home. Not anything that happened over there, anything I remember. And the friends were a diversion that you needed to survive. The thing about Vietnam too was different than all the other wars, and even the most recent wars, is that you didn't go over as a unit or a company. Okay, you didn't go over knowing everybody in the unit. Boom. Yeah, I mean, you could be switched into your squad. A guy could be there for 2 weeks and he'd be gone. Another guy would begin there for 6 months and he'd be gone. And so you never developed, except for momentarily friendships, you didn't get the chance to, well, let's get together after the war. Because one guy is in Oklahoma, one guy's in Pennsylvania, one guy's in California. How the hell do you get together? You don't. So we never got together. As like in the wars today, they send a National Guard unit over. Well, those little guys will have an anniversary because they went to Guard together. They went over to Afghanistan, whatever. They stayed together as a unit, got to be friends instead of continually transferring. That's why, the Vietnam Memorial thing, or the Vietnams, didn't really have reunions. At least, probably among the professional cadre, but not amongst us grunts and general soldiers.
Well said.
Was that?
Well said. Art, we're going to have to end it here for part one.
Sure.
There's more I want to talk to you about. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to thank you for being on my Boomer Buddies podcast. I've been wanting to get you on here for a long time. I've always looked up to you. I don't know if you knew that, but
Not necessary. Before you close out here, if we go to a second session, it goes to time and a half. I just want you to know.
All right. For my Boomer Buddies podcast, I'm Rick Reed. Until next time, we'll see you around the block. Thanks, Art, for joining us today. If you're listening and watching us on YouTube, do me a favor, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with some friends. Also, you can hear us on Buzzsprout and Spotify.